History gives us these giant legends, towering figures who are really just defined by their biggest victories. But what about the actual person behind the title? We always get the Sultan, but we so rarely get to meet the man. Well, today, we're going to try and look past the legend of Saladin. And our guide for this isn't some modern historian, it's someone who literally stood right by his side, who saw the man behind the myth.
Our guide is a man named Baha ad-Din, Saladin's personal biographer. And see, he wasn't looking back through centuries of dust. He was right there, in the tent, on the battlefield. He wrote that what he saw with his own eyes made stories that are usually considered implausible and fantastic suddenly seemed totally believable. He gives us this rare, really intimate look at the character of a man who shaped an entire century. And the first thing he shows us is a true test of that character.
So, our first story isn't from some epic battlefield. No, it's from a courtroom, and it reveals this core trait of Saladin's character: his absolute commitment to justice, not just for other people, but for himself.
Okay, so picture this. An old merchant shows up at court with a pretty serious accusation. He claims that a slave who had just died and left a fortune that Saladin's treasury now held was actually his property, which meant, in the merchant's eyes, the Sultan himself was holding on to money that didn't belong to him. I mean, what an incredibly gutsy claim to make.
Just think about the sheer audacity of that for a second. This isn't just some minor legal dispute. You have a common merchant directly challenging the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. We're talking one of the most powerful rulers on the planet at the time. Back in the 12th century, this wasn't just bold, it was probably a death sentence. The power imbalance was just absolute.
So, how do you think this is going to play out? You have an absolute monarch being publicly accused by a regular guy. The expected response probably involves a one-way trip to a dungeon or, something much worse. But Saladin's reaction was something nobody saw coming.
Instead of just laughing him out of the room, Saladin actually agrees to a formal hearing. He says, "Let this man come, and I will defend myself in accordance with the law." And Baha ad-Din tells us that when the hearing started, Saladin literally left his throne, his seat of power, walked down and sat beside the merchant as an equal to listen to his case. He submitted himself to the law, not as a king, but as just another defendant.
Okay, so justice was clearly a cornerstone of his rule. But what happens on the battlefield, where all the rules are different? Well, here, Baha ad-Din recorded another, really surprising trait: this deep capacity for compassion, even for his sworn enemies.
Baha ad-Din tells this incredibly powerful story. During a raid on a Crusader camp, a 3-month-old Frankish baby is stolen. The mother is, of course, completely desperate. But then, in this remarkable show of respect, her own commanders tell her to go appeal directly to Saladin, calling him very merciful. So she does, and when she reaches him and tells him what happened, his eyes fill with tears. The Sultan is visibly moved. He immediately sends a messenger to the camp market, finds the baby, buys it back, and within the hour, that child is back in its mother's arms.
So where did this incredible sense of justice and this deep compassion come from? According to his biographer, the answer was crystal clear. These weren't just, personal quirks. They were the direct result of his deep and abiding religious faith.
Baha ad-Din actually recorded Saladin's own words on this. He saw his rise to power not as something for his own glory, but as a divine mandate from God. The mission to unite the Muslim forces, to retake lands from the Crusaders, in his mind, that was a sacred duty. And this is the key. His conduct, his justice, his mercy, it was all tied to this core belief that he was an instrument of a higher power.
These virtues we're talking about aren't just little anecdotes. They're the actual foundation of the historical figure we remember today. They directly fueled the actions that led to his greatest victories. So, let's just quickly put all this into a bit of historical context.
His rise was incredibly fast. He takes power in Egypt in 1169, and by 1187, he achieves his lifelong goal, the recapture of Jerusalem. This, of course, kicks off the famous Third Crusade and his rivalry with King Richard the Lionheart, which interestingly ends not in a final conquest, but in a peace treaty. He died just a year later, a figure who was revered by his own people and, remarkably, respected by his enemies.
So when we boil this whole intimate portrait down, what do we see? We see a legacy that's really defined by principles. We see a leader who chose justice over the convenience of his own absolute power. A warrior who showed compassion when cruelty was just the norm. A man driven by faith, not by personal ambition. And Baha ad-Din also tells us about his incredible generosity. Apparently, Saladin's treasurers would literally hide money from him because they knew if he saw it, he'd just immediately give it all away.
Ultimately, what Baha ad-Din's account gives us is a human being, someone full of conviction and complexity. It completely challenges those simple cartoon character versions of people that history, especially the history of a conflict, so often creates. And it leaves us with a really crucial question. How does seeing the real humanity of a figure like Saladin change the way we understand the entire concept of a historical enemy?